Hi, everybody. Sorry for the delayed start. Mark and I were coming over from the executive stage, so thanks for your patience.
Hi, everybody.
Um,
Hi, Matt.
Hi, Mark. Thanks for joining us here again, and thanks to everybody here for watching and listening. For those who didn't have a chance to see Mark and Jose on the executive stage, I'll offer a brief introduction to Mark, and then we'll get started with the interview. By the way, I'm Matt Savas from the Lean Enterprise Institute. Mark is a senior coach and chief engineer for strategy at the Lean Enterprise Institute, and he is the author of the new book, Managing on Purpose, using hoshin kanri to develop strategy, align teams, grow leaders, and innovate your enterprise. He just held it up there. Mark spent 23 years at Toyota, including time in Japan, North America, managing their hoshin kanri process. Since joining LEI in 2011, Mark has coached executives and led lean transformations across diverse sectors, including helping organizations align strategy with daily management through Hoshin, Conry, and lean management systems. Welcome, Mark.
Great to be
Um,
here. Thanks.
we don't have much time to explore a pretty complex topic like Hoshin Conry, but let's start with the basics. Could you offer the audience just an overview of what hoshin kanri is? It's a Japanese term. Not everybody may be familiar with it.
Yes, I'm going to read the definition from the book because that's the best thing to do, I think. Uh, Hoshin Kanri, as it kind of introduced in my book, is a management system for strategy that defines midterm and long-term direction, those objectives and targets, and annually builds alignment vertically and horizontally to the direction, manages annual execution to the direction, and develops capability of people throughout the organization. So I know that's a mouthful, but that's what I learned it to be in Toyota. And maybe I could offer a little bit of history of it too, so that people understand where it
That'd be
came.
great.
In the Really came out of the teachings of Edward Demings in the late 50s and early 60s in Japan. And coming out of that, a lot of that focused on quality movement that was introduced to Japan to kind of people sometimes don't remember there was a time when Japan wasn't known for quality. And uh, a lot of that changed in the 60s when a lot of organizations took on quality improvement in their manufacturing, production, product development processes. But Toyota and a few other companies took a step beyond that and said, we need to improve the quality of our leadership and our management system as well. And so Hoshin Kanri was started. Toyota is one of the pioneering companies that took it on. Bridgestone was another. It really kind of started in the early 60s. And since that time, Toyota's used it as its method to define its future strategy and execute upon that.
By the way, for those with us, you're welcome to also submit some questions using that Q&A function. I'll look out for those. Um, so in your bookmark, you describe Hoshin as a long cycle of PDCA. What do you mean by that?
Well, PDCA, if the concept of plan, do, check, act is something we can do on a minute to minute, hourly basis. Matt, you and I are having this interview. We could take a few moments at the end of this interview and say, how did it go? Like what worked, what didn't work? How could we improve the next time we try this again? And then change our plan on how we execute our next interview. Hoshin, if you think about we're looking at a year, 2 years, 3 years down the road. Well, in reality, Hoshin is a process as well. I mean, I think that strategy is a process. That's something I introduce in the book. There's inputs and outputs that you want hopefully with some business objectives. But typically your strategy or your Hoshin it's on a longer term basis. I mean, you're looking out. And so how do you reflect on how you did is part of the system you should set up to ensure you're successful. Did you be at the beginning of the year, you put forth some certain objectives with specific targets related to those? and you executed on those objectives, how did you do? You want to check at the end of the year, but you're probably too many companies kind of wait to the end of the year to decide and figure out what they should do. It's good to also like review on a monthly basis. Are you based on your plan? Are you progressing with what you determined relative to I would say, not just to the plans, but the targets you set forth as well. So that kind of like, I would call it I think you referred to as long cycle PDCA and short cycle PDCA, I think are critical to like success. Because you got to analyze and problem solve if you're behind. And if you wait a year to do that, you're probably going to be way behind.
Yeah, as we developed your book, that was one of the core lessons that stood out to me, how strategic planning is a process, and fundamental to it is learning. Another key part of hoshin that you go into great depth in the book is collaboration and how organizations can work cross-functionally and break down silos, build consensus. Why do you think organizations struggle with that, and why is it important, and how can organizations do it better?
Well, yeah. So one of maybe just to review a little bit, in the book, a primary part of the case study that's introduced that kind of flows through the book, and a primary part of the fundamental thinking that I introduce is this idea that there's both vertical and horizontal alignment that's critical to the success of hoshin kanri, of executing on it. But I would say it's critical to the success of organizations being able to achieve their objectives. And part of the reason for that, and let's just focus on your question, I think focuses primarily on that horizontal part,
That's
which
right.
many studies have shown is where most organizations struggle. Because in a functional organization, the leaders can tell people what to do and whether that's the best way or not to do things. At least, I mean, that generally people kind of take will take direction from their boss. But when you work across an organization, you're talking about people that potentially in an organization could be competitive, depending on how the culture of the organization is. So, but taking a step back, if you're trying to develop the strategic objectives, hosting objectives for an organization on where it should focus, that the market and the customers drive what's needed from the organization. If you're in any kind of competitive market, and it's not driven by and those typically aren't driven by like some functional responsibility. So let's in the example of the case study that's in the book, I talk the primary case is based on a company called True Mowers. They make lawn mowers, and the whole market is shifting to electric mowers when they don't have one. And so that it's critical that they develop that and deliver that to the market. Well, to do that, the company's got to like not only develop the lawnmower, they've got to make it, they got to produce it, they've got to market it, and they have to have the skills to do that, which relates to functions all across the organization. So how the organization collaborates on to do that is critical. So in the book, I talk about specific methodologies and tools you can use. Like I introduce what's called a consensus building matrix for the organization to establish like a mechanism to define what are the core objectives among the top leadership team, and then build consensus on how the organization will execute on those things, but also how each of the functions within the organization will support each other to ensure that they're successful. I'd say one other thing about that, Matt, is just that we can't ignore. It comes up a lot of questions. Is it relates to how I would say leaders are motivated and compensated in an organization. If
Hmm.
all leaders are driven by is what their functional target is in the organization, you're going to create silos. So in Toyota, also you were kind of like your leadership and your executive performance, your promotability, your bonus, let's call it, was based not just on achieving some functional target, it's how well you work across the organization. We evaluated those things, how well you are able to do something we call maybe lead with responsibility as opposed to just with authority. Because when you take on as a leader a hosting objective, you got to be able to pull others that may not report to you and get consensus and I'd say lead showed like genuine leadership across the organization.
Well, let's talk about that part about leadership and developing it, because also central to the book is the idea of hoshin as a tool to develop leaders. How is it used to do that? And what do you think companies? Uh, well, I guess let's start there. How is it used as a tool to develop leaders?
Well, so it relates a little bit to what I just mentioned, which is that idea that leaders could lead with responsibility, not with authority. And I introduced a specific situation in the book that I is intentional. That's meant to kind of demonstrate how like a leader can show that. In the book, there's a plant manager who has responsibility for one of the plants and who tried some things that were pretty innovative the year before. And as the CEO moved to introduce hoshin kanri, the organization, she decided to give the plant manager, who was lower level than some of his peers in the organization, decided to give him full responsibility for a corporate initiative, corporate level initiative despite his role, as a plant manager. She was hoping through that, the CEO was hoping that the plant manager would demonstrate some capabilities to lead, like I said, across functions. In this case, he's having to lead and demonstrate leadership capabilities with people above his level, but also people in other functions. And in the book, the CEO sees that sometimes he struggles with that. And so it's the CEO's response. She recognizes her responsibility in that situation to kind of help coach him and get him out of his, like, just thinking about his plant manager role and think beyond that relative to the responsibilities he's been given. So I think that's in Toyota, that was a mechanism we use like a lot to develop capability of leaders. Is kind of ask them to step up to a role that's a little bit above, perhaps beyond their current like expectation in the organization. And that Hoshin gives you that mechanism in a sense that can be managed and supported and and used as a forum for leaders to kind of coach those people that are being developed in that way. And then you can see like the outcome of that is, well, in this case, the not to spoil the end of the book, but that this plant manager ends up becoming the next CEO of the organization a few years down. So, but you can see, I think some people are sometimes put in those situations and aren't so successful. But I think that it's an excellent way for the organization to like, to test that out and see and give people those opportunities who are used for the people that you see have genuine potential.
So, Mark, have spent the better part of the last decade helping who knows how many, probably dozens of companies of all sizes, small and huge companies, with their strategic planning. What do you see as what companies struggle with in their strategic planning process, or what do you see as kind of the biggest problems out there?
Oh, that's good. That's a great question. Uh, it's probably a little bit situational, unique company to company. But I would say, one of the things that is a transition point significantly for leaders is as you transition to utilizing Hoshin Kanri is, we've talked a lot about the system just now, about the management system and how leaders have to take responsibility and leadership. But part of taking responsibility and leadership, like where I came from, Toyota, was you had to understand what the problems were down into the organization. And too often leaders tend to operate only like at the top. And part of hoshin kanri that's I talk a lot about in the book is that it's both a top-down and a bottom-up methodology. We want innovation coming up from within the organization. So for to do that, leaders kind of need to get out and go to the Gemba. I know we talk a lot about that, but go out and see like because the problems that exist that are preventing you from achieving your strategy or your like month-to-month plans, those exist in the work. They don't exist in some conference room. And so, one of the things we want to identify as we go through this process is uh, how do we, first of all, do we have the culture to raise problems? And then when problems exist, how do we go, do we have a methodology to solve them effectively? And part of that methodology is leaders taking the initiative and understanding how to coach the people in the organization to help them progress. And so you asked, going back to your original question, which what's one of the biggest barriers? I think one of the biggest barriers is that leaders don't know how to do that, honestly.
Mm,
So one of the things you said I've worked with a lot of different organizations. I have in many different industries, big and small. I often ask the top leadership to take on and solve a problem down in the organization. It could be a quality related issue. It could be an on-time delivery issue. It could be a manufacturing or product development related issue, but issues that exist that are impeding a specific part of the business in the like and down into the work of the business. I'm working with a healthcare organization right now where I mean they were classic, very large, well-respected healthcare organization. They're classic top management leaders. I mean, they kind of led from their conference room uh, and were constantly in meetings. And they've been asked now to solve a very specific business problem. And one of the things they learned is that, first of all, they don't know how to go and see the problem, and they don't know how to break down the problem, and they don't know how to work with others to help solve a problem. So we can't have, and just to be clear, we can't have leaders. I mean, obviously, we don't want leaders solving every small business problem in an organization. However, I do think that learning to solve like one problem that way, and maybe long ago those leaders did solve problems like that. They've just forgotten. But going back and learning that again is pretty impactful for how leaders behave and how they're able to coach going forward. I know there's a long
mm.
answer, Matt. I hope.
Well, another thing that you're careful to point out in the book is, and I think you actually mentioned this in the book, that in your entire time at Toyota, you had never encountered the X Matrix. And the X Matrix is an extremely popular tool for strategic planning. Um, how is the process you described in the book different from the X Matrix? And what do you see as kind of or do you see any flaws or issues with that very popular tool? You see it everywhere.
It's interesting. I mean, that my screen here has it shows the direction is not going to the X. But well, my problem with the X Matrix has little to do with its like format.
Hmm.
My problem with the X Matrix is that and it's a little bit a problem in general with the tools of Lean, is that people tend to think that that's what Hoshin Kanri is about. It's about this template that you use, and so and I think that's a real problem because it tends to take away the focus of the need for all the stuff I was just talking about, how you develop capability of leaders, how you build innovation in the organization from the bottom up in an organization. How do you ensure you have a management system that robustly reviews and does PDCA, and how you create a culture of the organization that allows problems to surface as a leadership team. And also, I would say how you develop strong uh, agreed upon, aligned like objectives for the organization. And so it becomes about filling in a template. I mean, honestly, I came out of Toyota, and I think like within 2 weeks after I left Toyota, Jeff Liker, who's a pretty well-known person in the community, called me. He was working on a book about leadership, and he said, "So, what do you think about this X Matrix? I never heard of it." Now, since that time, to your second part of your question, I've encountered some companies that use it. I would say, so Matt, a little bit. You do see it a fair amount, but I actually see it less than I expected. There's some companies that use it, and I think some companies have found a way to use it, and I'm fine as long as they're first and foremost thinking about the fundamental like thinking I just shared. I mean, it's uh, I'm okay with a tool. Now, one of the practical aspects that I've seen to be a challenge, and organizations have come to me, and actually I said, I don't use the extra. They're like, thank God, because because I think it's a little bit like complicated. And if you're trying to, a great thing about Toyota, that if you're trying to engage, Toyota is really good at engaging from like, for improvement from the bottom up and engaging the whole organization. It has to be simple. I mean, if you're wanting to engage people like all the way through the organization, it's not about people's intelligence. Everybody's intelligent, but you want something that doesn't require like a lot of thought process to get through and understand. And I think sometimes people find that the explanation is a little bit like difficult to process. It's kind of like this square thing you got to read from four different sides, and it's also a little bit organizations find a little bit hard on how you like break use that as a tool to break down problems and take them lower in the organization. So anyway, that. Uh, but again, back to what I said, uh, I'm not against an effectively used tool as long as the basic thing is behind it.
Mhm. I was struck as you wrote your book, Mark, how uh, fairly simple the tools are that you provide in it, but the tool you come to realize it's almost incidental because the core of it is the like you said the basic thinking and the process behind it, and the quality of those things is what determines the quality of the outcome. We have just 5 minutes left here, and I think a lot of people they want to know where to get started. What advice do you have for a company who wants to get started using hoshin to transform their strategic planning?
Buy my book. That's for little plug there. No, but I recommend and like this is something I learned in Toyota. Like it's a try a model line approach. Now you say, how would you do that with this big strategic thing? Well, the fact of the matter is strategy and organization, hoshin kanri, it's a pretty high risk endeavor. I mean, you're engaging whatever role you have in the organization, whether you're the CEO or whether you're the head of some continuous improvement group or another function. I mean, taking on this as for an entire organization can be fairly high risk. I mean, it's kind of because in some sense you're like putting the business on the line. You're trying something that could and also you're engaging people across the leadership team and up and down the organization. So I say in my book, I say try it in one, particularly with if you're in a fairly small organization. I mean, you don't have a lot of choice. Do it with the company. If you're in where I've helped multi-billion-dollar companies let's take a business unit, and that could be a fairly decent-sized business unit, uh, and try it there. And because you're going to have to, you're asking a lot of lead. I say it's high risk, but it's also a fair amount of effort if you do it effectively to engage leaders and change their behavior because sometimes those behaviors are ingrained, and that part needs to be changed too. So if you can try it there and see how it goes. I mean, typically, or it helps organizations because I mean, they get a chance to focus now on 3 to 5 important things that they want to do. But you can test it out in that part of the organization, work out some of the issues just like you would a model line in manufacturing. And then it's effective, I think, to take it across a, a big corporation.
And in our last session with Jose, we discussed the relationship between hoshin kanri and daily management. Is there a sequence that companies should consider when implementing those things? Should they try to do both at the same time? Should you try to do daily management first? Should you try to do hoshin first? What advice do you have there?
Well, we did talk a little bit about that in the last session, but you know, people ask me that a fair amount, so I'm glad you asked that question. I think you can, if you have some level of stability in the organization, I think you can start with both. But if your organization is unstable, and what I mean unstable is it could relate to people in terms of leadership change. It could relate to the business, like the operations, like you're not delivering to your customer on time. You're not able to develop and get new products out. If there's that level of instability in the organization, starting with Hoshin is going to be a little bit of a challenge, I think. And because the what normally in that situation, the business leaders are consumed with those kind of like unstable daily management issues. So they got to get daily management. They have to get the fundamental processes of the organization stable. Otherwise, you can put in you're going to kind of setting yourself up for disappointment and failure. You can put in place these big plans, your Hoshin objectives, and be unable to achieve them for one or two reasons. One, the leadership's constantly diverted to try to put out fires that are happening in the organization. Or secondly, there isn't the capability to to deliver on the objectives you put in place. They kind of become just dreams. So I think but ultimately, maybe just to summarize, a healthy relationship in all this is to have a good daily management system in place that kind of measures and improves day to day based on what the things you use to like measure how you run the business, whatever your business is. If you're in manufacturing, that's kind of like just how do you make the product the customer needs, and a system that innovates the business, which Hoshin Kanri can provide for you, that helps you keep competitive in the market.
That was great, Mark. We're at time. Thank you for joining us here, and thanks to everybody for watching. Hold up that book one more time, Mark. It's Managing on Purpose, using Hoshin Kanri to develop strategy, align teams, grow leaders, and innovate your enterprise. Can you show it one last time for the viewers here?
Oh, sure.
Check
Yes,
it out.
please.
It's a great book. It'll teach you a
A
lot
workbook.
and will help you. It's very practical. It'll help you implement Hoshin in your organization. So thank you again. I'm going to close this space. Take care, everybody.
Thank you. Thank you, Matt.